So welcome to hand yoga. We are going to focus today on a hand massage using oil and a tool called a gua sha, or a substitute for a gua sha, which might be a spoon, either a metal spoon or a wooden spoon. I am using an oil that started out as just olive oil, and I infused it with some herbs, and then a month later strained those herbs out of the oil. And then I added some essential oils and some beeswax, and I heated it up and then let it cool slowly. And so it's made this nice salve that just isn't quite as drippy as oil, but you can easily use olive oil for this. I would suggest, and especially if you have a tendency towards arthritis, for example, to avoid coconut oil. I can see how it would be tempting to use because it also has this more solid texture to it. But coconut oil, Ayurvedically, as a yoga therapist, I understand to be a cooling oil. And that means it's not good if you naturally sometimes get cold hands, if you have any issues with circulation in your hands, if you have arthritis. It's a little bit of extra knowledge to understand in the realm of Ayurveda and yoga therapy, but if you have anything happening in your hands that is cold, dry, windy, or at all connected to vata, that air and space element, the coconut oil could be aggravating, could exacerbate any problems. So olive oil is a very neutral oil. Another wonderful option is sesame oil, not toasted sesame oil, but just normal sesame oil can be a really great choice for you. So we've got our oil of choice, a spoon or a gua sha. If you don't have any of those things, that's okay too. But we will begin by tuning into our hands and noticing how they feel in a neutral state. So before we get started, we can clasp our hands or gently rest them in our lap and pause to notice how they feel. We might notice things like the temperature. We can notice if our hands feel either dry or damp or clammy. We might notice if there's any tingling or aching or other kind of feeling in our hands. Now we can begin to invite a little bit of movement, just wiggling our fingers, rotating our wrists, observing how we feel as we move our hands. And now we'll begin to apply our oil. So I'm going to take just a little bit of this oil and put that on my hands. So if you have some oil, you can pour a little bit in your palms and gently start to massage that in. Oh, I still have a nasty bug bite that's been holding on, so sorry about that on the screen. This particular oil, I've added some ylang ylang and jasmine, some really floral oils. So I'm enjoying that smell, and I would encourage you, even if you just have something that seems relatively neutral like olive oil, that's going to have a wonderful smell to it as well. So we can take a second and just breathe in, cupping our hands in front of our nose to smell that for a moment. And here we're tuning in with our senses. By activating our sense of smell, we can also encourage our sense of touch so that we can feel and notice the effects of our massage. And now we can begin to just very gently massage the oil in a little bit more. So I'm going to rub my hands forward and backward. And now I can rub the top of one hand to the bottom of another. And the opposite side, one palm to one back of the hand. And I'm going to clasp my hands, however feels natural for me. Right index on the top is my natural clasp. So I can pulse in my natural clasp a couple times. And then we'll take the opposite, which might feel a little funny. And we can just feel into that, or possibly just gently squeeze again, activating our joints. And now I can begin to flex my hands and my wrists side to side. I've got my palms facing each other. I can simply rotate, enjoying that flex of the wrist. And if you've got a watch or some jewelry on, you can remove that. We can add a little bit more oil to our wrists and forearms. Those are so intimately connected to our hands that most hand yoga, if we want to fully benefit our hands, we've got to pay some attention to our wrists as well. I'm going to begin now with a massage for my palms. So I'll begin with my left palm using my right hand to massage counterclockwise. My left hand is relaxed and my right fingers are very gently creating a circular motion counterclockwise. That's on my whole palm. I can begin to tighten that circle and direct the energy more into just the center of my palm. And now slowly I'll change directions. So moving clockwise, I can start out in the very center of my palm and then expand wider, covering the whole palm. We'll pause to notice, just observing the effects and the difference. And now we'll do the same thing for the left palm. I'll use my fingers and create a counterclockwise spiral, massaging the whole of my palm. And then I'll become a little bit tighter, massaging the very center of my palm. And I'll change directions, so clockwise spiral in the very center of my palm. And then expanding out to massage the whole palm. And again, I'll pause to notice the effects. Noticing especially how easy it is to glide my fingers across my hand when I have some of that oil incorporated. Now we're going to move on to our gua sha, and I'll demonstrate first with the wooden spoon because that might be a little more accessible of a tool. You can use the rounded, smooth part of that tool to gently scrape from the finger side all the way across to my wrist, and I can go even onto the wrist itself as well. So I can use this flat, round part of the wooden spoon if that's what feels best, or I can scrape using the side of the wooden spoon. I can even do that using the handle depending on the spoon. So it's lovely to be able to do that with wood. There are even some gua shes that are made out of wood, and it's a particularly good material for that. So this is my gua sha made of rose quartz, and I can do the exact same thing here. One of the things that I notice that's different right away is the temperature. There's a natural cool feeling to the gua sha. It's a different temperature from my body, more dramatically than the wood. And it's also perhaps a little bit harder feeling physically. So I'm going to begin now by massaging from the pinky side of my hand all the way down my wrist, using a firm pressure, but I certainly don't want this to hurt. So especially at this more bony transition where my wrist is, I don't want to press too hard. So you can perhaps focus on the hand at first, and then focus on the side of the wrist. Or if it feels good for your body, you can make a smooth, long stroke all the way from under the pinky to the wrist. And you can travel as far up your forearm as feels good as well. So you can do small little movements or a big, long, sweeping movement. And if you have some oil incorporated, this is going to slide much more easily. If you didn't have any oil or any tools at all, you could also do this with your finger. So I could use this bony side of my index finger and slide as well. Now I'm going to change positions and I'm going to massage this fleshy part on the top of my palm along the pinky side. I'm going to press down and I can slide all the way across, or I can focus at first just on my hand, and then I can transition to focusing on the forearm. And I want to be in tune with my senses here. So the same way that I'm noticing the way that the oil smells, I want to notice how this feels. These movements aren't one size fits all. We want to be very thoughtful about the amount of pressure that we're using, about the exact placement of the gua sha. If we're using a corner, a flat side, there are a lot of different shapes that a gua sha might have. So if you have a curved area, if it feels good to apply pressure both towards the fingertips and towards the elbow, you can do that. There's some traditions that like to always only apply pressure from the fingers towards the heart. But other traditions can go forwards and backwards. And so, for example, when I was working with an occupational therapist, she was telling me that I have a lot of stuff that needs to be broken up, just tightness that needs to be broken up in my hands. So she recommended for me and my body that I go both directions. I'm not aware of many traditions that would say just towards the fingers, though. That one, certainly notice your body, how things feel, but that's not one that I'm aware of being promoted in a strong way. We can move on now to the center of our hand, the hollow of the palm, and that straight central line of the forearm. So here, I really like the curve of my spoon for that spot. There are other gua shas that are more curved than mine, so I might prefer to use my wooden spoon for this central hollow of the palm. And I can play with how rigid my fingers are or how soft and relaxed they are. Just working my way down my whole wrist and forearm. When working with a gua sha, sometimes your skin does get a little bit red. A little red is okay. Giving yourself a bunch of bruises is not so okay. So really do think about how much you're pressing, how your body's reacting. You may find that you need to reapply a little bit of extra oil. It's a great way to make sure that you're not creating too much pressure, potentially leading to a bruise. So here I can use the whole gua sha against the length of my forearm as I'm focusing on the center here. I could also use a corner and focus on that very central line. And sometimes you can feel, especially in the forearm, you can feel that fascia and that tension breaking up. There's kind of a bump feeling that I get when I work in this area, especially with the corner. So it's something to be aware of, to notice. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually be a really good thing that you're breaking up some tightness in your body. As we move across now, we're going to move across the index finger line. And here we're getting into the thumb as well. So let's say we can do both our thumb and our index at the same time. There's a lot of nice movements that we can do getting into this webbed space. So you can allow yourself to move intuitively here, working with the thumb side of the hand, the thumb and the index. And then, of course, sweeping down that angle of the forearm and the wrist as well. So there are gua shas made of stone, made of metal, made of wood, any of those materials that you might find in a kitchen spoon can be accessed here. And for example, now I can feel a lot of my body heat is in the stone. It does not feel like a cold or different temperature anymore. So as I move from this intuitive movement with my thumb area, I can see if there are any other intuitive movements that I'd like to do for my palm or my inner arm, those two areas that we're working on. I could concentrate on just one very specific area. If I noticed as I was sweeping across everywhere, there was one spot that felt particularly tight. So that could be here at the base of my hand and my wrist. I can go side to side rather than vertically. You can move in just one area. It can be an occasion where the edge of the spoon feels really nice as well. Especially if I'm congested or feeling sick, this area can be a reflex marma point that could be aggravated with congestion. It's a nice spot to be able to massage here. Okay, and now that we've gotten any last intuitive movements done, we can just pause. We can also notice the difference in color. If we have gotten a little bit of redness or activation on our skin, we can take note of that. Mine looks pretty similar side to side, so I'm glad I didn't put too much pressure on my hands. I'm pausing to feel the effects, to notice the difference. And I'm noticing the effects of receiving the massage, but I'm also noticing the effects of giving the massage, noticing how my right hand feels. And now we're going to do the same routine for the right hand. And I suppose I might have shared earlier that I'm doing left hand to right hand, but you might also choose to do non-dominant hand to dominant hand. Sometimes the non-dominant hand has less problems with it, so it can be nice to start there and then move on to the dominant hand because there might be more to notice. You can actually see, there's something unique happening over there that needs a little extra attention. You can observe the difference. So I'm going to add a little more oil to my forearm on this side. And I'm going to take another deep inhalation as well to just smell the oil that I'm using, connecting to my senses. Okay, so we did some initial just moving around, playing, showing you how to use the gua sha and the different tools. So we can do that same kind of intuitive movement to get ourselves started on this side. And now we'll move on to the pinky side of our hand, really focusing on the side, not the pinky top, the palm, but the true inner side of our hand. So I'll begin with my gua sha here. You know, another thing to notice is simply, is a stone or metal gua sha, does that get a little bit too slippery for you? The wooden gua sha can absorb some of the oil, so it might not be as slippery or as hard to hold on to. I'm gently focusing on massaging and gliding, sliding against the side of my arm. I can do long sweeping movements, I can go forward and backward, or I can move just towards my elbow. Noticing the difference between sides as well. So far, this side seems the same to me. And now I'm going to transition to the top of my hand, along the pinky side still. And I'm going to move on now to the center of my hand. And I think, again, I'd like to switch to my wooden spoon, because I like how that rounded part of the spoon makes it more accessible to get into the center of my palm. I can move all the way down my hand, down my wrist to my elbow. That I think I like more with the flat edge. I think it can just press against more skin at the same time. When I had some real problems happening with my right hand, when it was not doing so well, I could use, my occupational therapist could use a metal gua sha that she used. She liked to call them her butter knives. So she would do this along my right forearm, and it would sort of ripple. Doesn't do that anymore. So if you're noticing kind of some shaking or shivering on your skin, that could be a sign that you've got just some real tension built up that could benefit from being broken up in this part of your arm. And that, for me and my body, according to my occupational therapist, was a real benefit of going in both directions of going forward and backward rather than just going wrist to elbow. If you've got a really tight spot, you can dig in with the corner of your tool. You do want to be careful not to get too much redness, too much irritation built up. Certainly here I can see I'm getting more redness in this hand than I was getting in the other one. So a little bit of a difference, you can tell. It's my dominant arm. I'm going to move on now to my index and my thumb. And again, I can move in this webbed space between the two. This is such a relaxing, soothing. This is a place where a lot of people, especially a lot of quilters like me, as well as people who write with a pen, remember that? Writing with a pen can get a lot of tightness and tension built up there. So this is a nice place to use a little bit more of an intuitive movement. Again, part of my philosophy approach today of moving from the place that's likely to be less irritated towards the place that is more likely to be irritated. So I'm gently sliding along the thumb, near where my index is, the side of my hand, and then down both the side of my forearm and that right side of the forearm. That's good to really look at your skin as you're doing this too, to notice how your skin is reacting, if the color is changing, if it feels good or nice or different to have the oil in your skin, to notice as the oil is absorbed, to observe, maybe I need a little more oil. You don't want to be dripping here though, and you don't want your tool to become so greased up that it's hard to hold on to. So finding a happy medium there can be important. And now we'll do a little more intuitive moving here on this side. So I'm just moving with my gua sha or with my wooden spoon, cross my hand. Again, maybe I want to move laterally at the base of my hand. Okay, and then once more, we'll pause, noticing the difference between sides, noticing the lingering effects in the first arm that we did, even visually observing the difference between sides. So I don't know if it's coming across on camera, but I certainly do notice a little more redness in my right forearm than my left. And here my hands look pretty similar to each other. Maybe a little bit of extra redness on the left side. They definitely feel nice though. They feel a little warmer with that increase in circulation. We can take another little intuitive movement for our hands, just gently massaging the oil in, noticing if you'd like to add a little bit more oil or not. Mine are feeling good. They're feeling still a little slippery. We have about 10 minutes left, so we don't want to end our hand massage feeling too greasy. Okay. Now we're going to work a little bit on the back of the hand. So here, looking at the back, I'm going to start with my non-dominant hand. I'm just going to massage into the joints between each finger. So similar to what I did before with my palm facing up on this big space between the index and the thumb. And let's go now a little more in tandem rather than one hand on the other. So now I'm going to get caught up Just being mindful of my ring, that I don't press that unpleasantly into my skin. Could also take something like that off. And now again, I'm going to massage the left hand. I don't want to press real hard into the back of my hand, but what I can do is holding my gua sha at an angle. So it's not perpendicular to my hand, but nice and angled. I can very lightly drag across the back of my hand. Very, very lightly, so I'm almost not there. And notice if that feels good in your body or if it doesn't. Here, because I've got so many big veins and things in my hand, I'm gonna just draw the tool from my fingers towards my elbow. I'll pause to notice, just observing if I was gentle enough there. I think I was. I think it feels nice. And now the other side, again, kind of a flat application of the tool. It's not putting as much pressure as the perpendicular tool does. Again, I can pause to notice how that feels on the backs of my hands. And now we can really dig into the back of the forearm. This is a place where a lot of stuff happens on our hands. And you can see when I wiggle my fingers, there's a lot of movement in this part of my forearm. A little bit too on the inside of the forearm, but really noticeable activity here. And so that, if you're using your hands a lot, this part of your elbow and then, or this part of your forearm and then also your elbow can really get tired and exhausted. And just love how it feels to use a gua sha and the oil here, even if I'm just scraping with my knuckle if I don't have a gua sha or a tool. So check that it feels slippery enough. Perhaps I'll add just a tiny bit more oil, very little amount. And here we're going to move more intuitively rather than in parts of pinky, top, thumb. So I can begin either from my wrist towards my elbow, or I can start more at this bigger part of my forearm. And I want to listen to my body here, feeling physically, but also looking, noticing with my eyes, is there a lot of shivering that happens? Is there a lot of bumping? You can sort of feel more when you have a tool. So I'm using the gua sha to feel the way that my forearm feels here. Does it bump up and down? Does it shiver? Is there like a grating feeling? That's going to tell me something about how my forearm is feeling right now. If there's a place that feels particularly tender, maybe like it's particularly enjoying this movement, I can dig in very specifically there. So I can use the rounded part of my gua sha. I could use the rounded part of my spoon, even the end of the spoon. And I could move up and down. If there's a really repetitive movement that I do with my hands, say I'm gripping the edge of a quilt a lot, this movement, I can do that movement and I can notice what moves in my hand. Oh, right there. Look at how that's moving. And then I can use the gua sha in there to feel, is there a lot of friction or tension as I move across that point? If so, can work a little more precisely to break things up. Again, we want to be careful. We're not overly activating our skin. We don't want to walk away with a bruise. Although I will say, I think sometimes my occupational therapist did bruise me a little bit when she was doing this. And the result is that I feel better. But I wouldn't necessarily give just advice in general to bruise your skin. I would say try to be on the gentle side. I'm not an occupational therapist. You probably aren't either. Okay, here we go. So I can notice again the difference between sides. And then I can do the same movement on the back of my right forearm. So again, I'll add just a little bit more oil here. Make sure things can slide smoothly. And I can begin to just take some general information here. So I'm sliding the gua sha, sliding the handle of my wooden spoon. And I can notice, is it bumpier? Is it smoother? Do I feel either more or less in my arm itself? But also, do I feel more or less in the hand that's holding the tool? You can get a lot of information from the hand that's holding the tool. So on this side, I do feel quite a bit more tension right here, which is my spot. If this goes unattended, I tend to get a lot of deep pain in the center of my elbow. So I want to use my gua sha here in a way that's very familiar to me. This is a big part of the work that I do. I normally keep this gua sha. If it had oil on it like this, I would wash it first, but I keep it in my sewing bag so that I can look at it and remember to spend just 5 minutes or so without any oil, just briefly massaging this area. So digging in with a point, with a rounded area, can really be wonderful at breaking up stiffness, tiredness, anything achy in your arm. But you want to listen to your body as you do that kind of movement, right? Breaking things up can be good, but taken too far, it doesn't feel great. Here I'm really getting into my elbow itself. And again, I'm going to take a moment and think about what are the movements that I frequently do. So say you write a lot by hand. You're a writer. So do that movement and look, what is really moving and triggering here when I write by hand? So if I was a writer, be practicing that writing movement, and then I can get in along that line. Similarly, I can do a movement that actually reflects a lot of the repeated work that I do with my hands around quilting, also typing at the computer, also on my iPhone, right? I type more than I should probably with just my thumb. I try always to remind myself to do my index or other fingers too. But I can try and replicate. Sometimes it can be hard to see. But I can replicate what's happening when I move just my thumb around. I'm Instagramming, typing, and then I can find that spot that moves a lot during that repeated activity. And I can slide my gua sha very gently or quite firmly and start to break up any tightness or holding that's happening there. So doing this a little bit sometimes is better than a lot in one go. I wouldn't recommend doing it for a longer amount of time than what we've done together because you can accumulate too much redness. But this was a wonderful amount of time. We really focused on a lot of different areas of our hand, both the palm, back of the hand, the joints. There's not so much that I'm aware of for a gua sha with the fingertips. You certainly could try, though. You could see, does that feel good? Do I notice anything? It's can also be great to use on other parts of your body too. It'd be nice to, put a little oil and then check, is there an area that shivers a lot or feels real tender that could benefit from those movements with the gua sha? So for me, certainly the area that I try to do most often for my hands is this part of my elbow, my dominant side. So we'll just massage our hands, massage the oil in one last time, kind of relax our body. You can breathe in deeply, the smell of our oil once more, cupping our hands to our nose. And we'll pause again, just like we did at the beginning of our practice, to notice our hands in our new neutral. We can notice the temperature of our hands, the dryness or the clamminess, moisture. You can notice if there's any feeling in our hands, an ache, a tingle. There might be kind of a good tingle even after, so they might be tingling more now than before. You want to make sure that you haven't triggered anything that gives you a problematic tingle in your nerves. Pausing to notice the effects. All right, and thank you for practicing hand yoga with me. I hope you learned some fun things about oil and gua shas.